there, this is Bridget Danner with Women's Wellness Collaborative, and this is a short video to help you understand your cycle better and answer the question, is this normal? In healthcare, we get a lot of questions about that, and also a lot of people assessing themselves as normal. Say, for instance, they say, well, I only have a bowel movement every 3 days, but that's normal for me. Or I only get my cycle every 40 days, but that's normal for me. So it's important to differentiate what you've become accustomed to and what is most healthy in your body. So let's get to it. First thing I'd like to do is share with you a picture. And you should be able to see that now. So this is a chart I found online, not entirely sure the source of it, but it's quite helpful. So if you look down on the bottom, there it says 0 days, 14 days, 28 days. So this is the length of a typical cycle, and you can see the phases there. So in the first part of the cycle in your lower left, you see we're in the follicular phase. That's the first 14 days, and the first part of that is menses. So the day 1 of your cycle is the day you have bleeding, like a significant amount of bleeding where you'd say, yeah, my flow is starting. I don't really count just like a little spot or a little crampiness. So that's day 1 of your cycle. That's important to know. And day 14 is most ideally when ovulation happens. So that's when you're most fertile. So if you're trying to get pregnant, that's a good time to learn about. If you're trying to avoid pregnancy, you're using different natural family planning type styles of birth control, this is the period you want to get familiar with to learn how to avoid, and we'll talk more about that later. The second phase of your cycle is called the luteal phase, and that's about another 14 days. So let's first talk about length of cycle. What is normal? So in my opinion, you know, this length right here is really ideal. So when I have a woman who is under that or way over that, we work on getting that cycle more to 28 days. If your cycle is, say, 25 days, it may be fine. You can still have successful pregnancy if that's what you're going for. But when you start to get into like a 24-day cycle, I would say, 23-day cycle, I would say that's a little short. Your egg is probably not matured enough to reach that nice mature phase when it expels from the ovary. And then if your cycle is very long, you know, like 40 days, I would say that's too long. Now here's one theory that I can present. So as far as if your cycle is a little long, like 30 days or maybe even 35 days, that could be normal and could lead to pregnancy. However, I would still say it's not ideal. I can say when I was trying to get pregnant, my cycle was a little long. It was like in the early 30s, and I was working on shortening it up. And it was still a little long, the cycle I did become pregnant, but it was improving. So that's a little bit about length of the cycle. Now, if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, or you have trouble ovulating for some reason, maybe you got off the birth control, or you're underweight, you might have a very irregular cycle. This is not really normal. The only time where this might start to be somewhat normal is if you're near menopause. If your hormone levels are really declining and you're not ovulating every month, then you may have months where your period comes sooner or later. And this is the only instance when we could say maybe that's normal. But if you're in your 20s or 30s, you shouldn't really be having these irregular cycles. That's something to work out with your practitioner and learn more about. Now let's talk about what happens over these 28 days. So what's going on with your hormones? So let's see. Let's start with that green line, if you can see that near the middle. That's the follicle stimulating hormone. So that starts to come up. You can see towards the end of menses. Often we'll get our hormones tested as women on day 3 of the cycle. And we're often testing this follicle stimulating hormone. So that starts to ramp up when the body signals that Estrogen and progesterone have really dropped, and it's time to make another egg. It's time to ripen another egg. So follicle stimulating hormone is released from the pituitary gland and signaled to the ovary to get to work making a ripe egg. So that's sort of a first trigger hormone. And then meanwhile, if you see the yellow line, that's estradiol. That's our dominant estrogen, and that starts to increase. So as estrogen increases, that's being made in the ovary, then the lining of the uterus starts to grow again. And you can see there it peaks right before your ovulation at 14 days. Now let's look at the blue line that is up with the green line. That's the luteinizing hormone. This is a hormone that signals the egg, the mature egg, to be released. So that peaks at ovulation, and if you take an ovulation predictor test kit with your urine, this is what it's testing, this luteinizing hormone. And if you have a high level, it signals, okay, the egg's about to come out. This is a good time to know, you're fertile. So that luteinizing hormone is released at the signal of the estrogen, the estradiol, being high. So that's important to know. That needs to be high enough for the body to trigger the next phase of the cycle. The next phase of the cycle, we said, is the luteal phase. And you can see with the purple line, what's dominant here is progesterone. That is released from what we call the corpus luteum. After the egg is released, the sac that's left behind, kind of like a yellow sac, makes tons of progesterone. And this progesterone helps to ripen the uterine lining. So estrogen grows it, and progesterone is meant to kind of ripen it, solidify it, that kind of thing. So we want that progesterone to be strong to prevent things like PMS or kind of a failed fertility attempt. So that's the dominant hormone in the second phase of the cycle. But I want you to notice the estrogen, the yellow line, is still pretty strong. This is something I didn't really learn or appreciate right away. But it's not that the estrogen just dies off. It's hanging in there too. It's just not as dominant. So when those both drop, that signals it's time to pregnancy has not been achieved and it's time for another period. So what could be going wrong here? What is normal and what is not normal? So first of all, PMS is a very common symptom, and it is not normal. You don't have to have PMS. So if you're experiencing PMS, whether it's weight gain or bloating or anxiety or irritability, then often this progesterone is off. It needs to be built up. Things that can help you have stronger progesterone are things like magnesium, avoiding sugar and alcohols. Let's see, also having just a nice strong ovulation will make you have a nice progesterone. So we have to give some credit to the first part of the cycle. How did that support the second part? So one way to have a nice amount of sex hormones is to manage your stress, reduce your stress the best you can, because if you're putting a lot of energy towards making stress hormone, you're not going to make as many of these sex hormones. Also, just fundamental things like sleeping, getting enough nutrition. These things are very supportive for the body. So another thing that's abnormal is spotting in this mid-cycle. This is something I've dealt with in my own body. If you're spotting, say on day 14 or day 18, then there's been a drop in estrogen or progesterone, that the body kind of was confused and the uterine lining starts to shed, but maybe it stops again because the hormone levels come back up. So these are some things to learn about your cycle. I hope that's really helpful for you. And if you've got any further questions, you're always welcome to contact me through the website. We have a lot of other great resources for you as well at womenswellnesscollaborative.com. Thanks so much for your time.